When Ted Cruz and Tucker Carlson fight, you root for both to lose, but mostly at this moment, you root against expansion of war in the Middle East. Our politics are becoming increasingly violent, and it's not clear what can or should be done about it. Finally, there were protests and a parade this weekend. We'll look back. Welcome back to the podcast for the 54% of Americans who regularly vote for progress in every election and want to convince their friends and family members to join our majority. This is Majority 54.
Well, Jason, we're recording this at around 2 p.m. Eastern time on Wednesday, June 18th, and there's a lot happening probably as we speak on this Iran-Israel situation, and I would imagine the Iran-Israel-U.S. situation, which we'll get to. It's not immediately clear to me what our involvement in this conflict is as we're recording, and I'm not sure all members of the Trump administration are clear on this, but let me step back and just give you a quick timeline of how we got here. So, earlier this year, Trump sent a letter to the supreme leader of Iran, basically saying, let's make a deal and bad stuff will happen if we don't make a deal. None of the press has read this letter from what I understand, but Trump apparently likes to read the letter to people who visit him in the Oval Office. So that's how we have some reporting about what's in this letter. The vibes seem to be similar to the Kim Jong-un letter that he wrote. And then from March to May, on the back of that letter, there's a gentleman named Steve Witkoff, who is the negotiator for the Trump administration, who's been basically, from what we can tell, trying to renegotiate the Obama-Iran deal. And Trump was told at various points that they were close to a deal. In early April, Netanyahu visits Washington, asks for the bunker-busting bomb, which is a 30,000-pound bomb that apparently only the U.S. has, that would allow them to penetrate and destroy these underground nuclear facilities. Back in April, Trump said no because he was negotiating with Iran and was optimistic at that point that they would have a deal. Then in May, U.S. intelligence starts picking up that it's likely that Israel will launch a major attack on Iran with or without American support. Now, at that point, there starts to become an obvious rift within the intelligence community. But Jonathan Swan over at the New York Times, who's done some great reporting on this, reported that senior U.S. intelligence officials were unaware of any new information that Iran was rushing to build a bomb. And at that, we've some of you have seen over the past few weeks that Gabbard has been basically saying she's been a bit bearish on Iran's nuclear capacity, and Trump was asked about this and said he doesn't care what Gabbard has to say. But Swan also qualified this by saying that although he doesn't think that the intelligence community thinks Iran is rushing to build a bomb, a lot of people do think they're close to building a bomb. If that seems like a contradiction, it might not be, because maybe they are close, but they're not rushing. Maybe they're close, but they've stopped. Who the heck knows? But that's where things are from an intelligence perspective. Exploring options about what to do about this potential imminent Israel attack. Trump went to Camp David to hear from experts and talk to Netanyahu. Netanyahu gave him a heads up ahead of time that they were going to do this attack. Also worth noting that the Ayatollah in Iran 2 weeks ago made a comment saying something to the effect of, we must have enrichment. Trump was asked about this on Air Force One by Swan. And Trump was adamant that he wouldn't accept any enrichment from Iran. And Swan said at that point, a couple of weeks ago, there was a shift in Trump's tone. He was less optimistic about a deal. Also reported that when Trump was told by the Israelis that they were going to do this attack, that he did not signal any disagreement, but that once the attack happened, for a period of time, Trump was in wait-and-see mode because he wasn't sure what was going to happen. He didn't say anything for a few hours. Rubio issued a statement that was lukewarm, didn't say that we stand with Israel. But according to Swan, and this leads us to this clip here, Trump is watching Fox News, which is still a kind of bastion of neoconservatism, which we'll get to, and essentially is getting hyped up about the war and being like, yeah, Israel's doing well. I want to take credit for this. And that's when we notice a shift in Trump's tone, which we'll get to. But I think a good starting point here is the senior senator from South Carolina, Lindsey Graham. This is the tone of Fox News right now. Let's go to this clip.
Well, I think what will happen is the Iranian people will know freedom for the first time since 1979. People probably asked that about Hitler in the 30s. What would happen in Germany if we took him out in the mid-30s? Well, I wish we had, because we know what happened when they let him stay in power. And here's what I can say. Taking the Ayatollah's regime down is a good thing, not a bad thing. And I'm willing to risk what happens next, because I know what's going to happen if they stay in power. They're going to keep.
What a dumbass thing to say. I mean, what kills me about all this is that there are two things that these people, the neoconservatives, and Trump, by the way, like, who was like, I was always against the war in Iraq and all this BS, like, none of them really were, right? They all pretend that they were. Even Josh Hawley, who popped popcorn during the invasion of Iraq and watched it from his dorm in London with, bragging about how great it was going to be, claims now that he was against the war in Iraq. They're all obsessed with two things that they think have a level of might that they don't have, and that is American air power and American special forces and clandestine operations. Both are the most powerful that anything in those categories have ever been. The air superiority is something that the United States has more than anybody else has ever had it. Probably naval as well. And yes, our clandestine operations are better than anybody's have ever been. And that doesn't get you a new government in Iran. Do you know what does? Sending in troops. So when you start talking about liberating a country and you start talking about the Iranian people knowing freedom, you are making a huge leap that dropping bombs will lead an oppressed population to overtake a government that's been there for your and I's entire lifetime.
Yeah, I was having a debate with my father about this on Friday, which for new listeners, my dad is a MAGA Republican, and he was trying to convince me that this bombing campaign is going to lead to an uprising of spontaneous support for democracy and a new regime in Iran. And first of all, I reminded him of his position on the Iraq War and his optimism around that. But also, like the Arab Spring, I mean, go down the list. We have a history of the quote unquote regime changes that don't always work out the way you want it to. And actually, there's a lot of evidence that there actually is a pluralistic, secular society in Iran, but that doesn't always win. Like it's about who has the guns, who has the power, who are the most extreme elements sometimes can win. It's not like, for instance, in Afghanistan that the Taliban necessarily enjoys widespread support, but they're sometimes the most extreme characters win the day in these post-war environments. Jason, we talked about Fox News, right? I'm gonna play one or two more clips just because this is like the equivalent of the presidential daily briefing.
This is what he's
seeing.
Totally.
So this is Levin on Fox News.
Yeah, so where are they? They're nowhere. How about China? Nowhere. How about Russia? Nowhere. What happened to World War III? There is no World War III. They all sound like a bunch of Marxist Islamists. They don't sound like patriotic Americans. Let me be clear. This is good versus evil. You're either a patriotic American who's going to get behind the President of the United States, the Commander-in-Chief, or you're not. One other thing.
Ugh, make me want to puke. I mean, it's interesting, Ravi, for us now to have gotten to an age where we're like, we've been through this before, and it was over 20 years ago.
Yeah, there are some noticeable differences between this one, which we'll get to. Some fascinating politics. I don't know if I've ever been as excited to play some of the clips that I'm about to play later in this podcast, like truly mind-blowing stuff. But let's go through Trump's tweets for a second here, or truths, because I think these are incredibly important messages. So what is going on here is Trump and his administration, although very pro-Israel, right, and pro-Netanyahu, and fairly deferential to Netanyahu, had been on this track where they didn't want to own this war, right? That was clear for a while. And JD Vance had this extensive tweet where people can read it and try to make sense of it, but essentially it's JD Vance trying to bridge this gap within the party of the Republican Party. So he's trying to speak to the anti-war elements of the party, which Trump was preaching an anti-war message when he was running. Like, we can all stipulate to how full of shit he was in that message. But he was preaching that message. He ran on that message. And JD Vance was essentially trying to stake out this territory, saying basically, hey, look, we don't want a nuclear weapon. That's our goal here. He noticeably didn't try to say too much about the U.S. support of Israel as a country, because that's very controversial in conservative circles nowadays. And then he was basically like, the president has earned our trust on this issue.
Yeah,
and I would
he was
say,
like trying to distance himself from this.
Yeah. And I'm not sure the president has earned our trust on this. And I think that
right on anything.
So here are some of the things he's truthed, and I'm sure there are more as we're recording, but these are some of the things he's truthed over the past day or two. We now have complete and total control of the skies over Iran. We know where the supreme leader is hiding. He's safe for now, and he basically implies that he won't be if they go after American soldiers. He all caps unconditional surrender. Okay,
I mean, what the hell?
So look, Jason, part of it is there's almost a two-part to this. One is one can debate like whether like regime change in Iran is a good or a bad thing, right? Like I actually think like there are good faith disagreements among people because this is a horrible regime which represses its own people.
And in a vacuum. Yeah, in a vacuum, you can debate that.
And I could sit across from somebody who we disagree on this and think they're still good people and that they're making rational points. I just happen to disagree. In some ways, I felt the same about Iraq. I was vehemently anti-war. I went to protests, but I also respect a lot of people who felt differently than me on that issue. What I can't forgive is that this administration is not clear about whether we're at war right now, Jason. That is like, and we'll get to some clips. I'm not the only one baffled by this, and there's some strange bedfellows who are also baffled by what this administration is doing. What Vance was basically saying, we've earned your trust. You don't have a policy. Alternatively, you're saying essentially in the public square and your intelligence officials are implying that the U.S. is not in the middle of this war and that at best we're providing intelligence support. But then you're as the president of the United States are using we, and you're saying pretty dramatic things, including he said something to the effect of the people of Tehran needed to evacuate the other day.
No, he said that exactly.
Yeah. So, Jason, we might be in the middle of a war, and the fact that we don't even know the answer to this question, I think, is absolutely insane.
Yeah, there's two parts of this that are particularly disorienting and make it that much more dangerous. One is that you're right. Fox News has become the presidential daily brief. And then Trump wanting to participate in that news is going to the Situation Room and then going on Truth Social and putting out things that are basically reporting stuff that's not coming across on the news. It's not out there, taking things he's learning from U.S. intelligence, learning from bomb damage assessments in Israel, classified information, and then putting it out on Truth Social to then see how it's digested by the presidential daily brief, which is Fox News. So when he puts out, we have air superiority, we being Israel and I guess the United States, because we're refueling them. But when he's putting that out there, he's going, okay, I just learned this from my other news source. Now you, my briefers, Fox, digest this and tell me what I think about it, right? Which is pretty backward. But then the other thing that's happening is when the president is saying we're at war with Iran, and then the administration, which shouldn't be separate, but in Trump world is not really being clear on that. And then you've got senior members of the president's own party calling for regime change, and really the president calling for regime change too, without using the words quite yet. But when you're saying unconditional surrender, when you're saying we could kill this guy anytime, what you're doing is you are doing out in front of the entire world what we used to do behind closed doors. The way it used to work, and you can argue whether this is good or bad, but it had some reason to it, is that if you wanted regime change in a country, you helped another country do it and you kept your fingerprints off of it. You supplied Soviet weapons to be used by the Mujahideen taking on the Soviets in Afghanistan. These are the kind of things that you did. You did it in a clandestine way. What you didn't do was have the president of the United States just come out and act like we're going to get regime change through air superiority. I don't think that's going to happen. And the more and more you up the temperature and make it seem like the Republican thing to do is to be for regime change in Iran, the closer you get us to a place where the only way to actually demonstrate your patriotism is to put American troops in harm's way.
It is important probably to mention what might not be obvious to the audience here, which is, Israel had targeted strikes on Iran. Iran was flat-footed on this, didn't expect Israel to come out as aggressively as they did. And Israel wiped out a huge percentage of the sort of senior leadership of key institutions within Iran, as well as some infrastructure. What they did not do was wipe out the nuclear capacity of the country.
Right.
There's some superficial damage. They can only do that with our help.
Which, by the way, is very different from the last time that Israel did this with regard to Iran, a couple decades ago, when they preemptively attacked.
Yeah, and they also had that Stuxnet or whatever it was, or whatever it was called. Or maybe I'm mixing up my viruses, but they had that virus that messed with the capacity, led to a meltdown. So the U.S. is critical here, and this is and again, I want to acknowledge the nuance here. Okay, Israel is a country that has been dealing with proxy battles and deaths of their own civilians at the hands of Iran for a long time. And through Hezbollah in Lebanon and other indirect ways, they have a legitimate beef with Iran. And I don't claim to make this, I don't think that this is a simple story. And having a nuclear-armed, megalomaniacal, Islamist, extreme regime dedicated to your extinction next to you is no small thing. So wanting to wipe out the nuclear capacity is something that I am absolutely sympathetic to. The question we have to ask ourselves as a country is whether we want to be in the middle of this directly or not. And again, reasonable people could disagree with this, but let's know what we're doing. If we're about to use a 30,000 ton bomb in Iran, basically be at war, can we have a real debate in the United States Senate? Can we have the president acknowledge it? Like, what is going on here?
Yeah. Also, part of that debate should be about Netanyahu's credibility right now, given what's gone on in Gaza in the last couple of years.
Right.
I mean, that has to be part. I agree with you that, absolutely, Israel has a long-held, valid reason to be concerned about Iran. But if we're going to do this whole thing based on the idea that Iran is about to get weapons of mass destruction because Netanyahu told us so, I have problems with that right now. I have a lot of problems with that.
I feel like when we're involved in a war, let's get on the same page. Let's get our intelligence people out there, right? That we went through this with Iraq, right? Where they're like, this is messier than that, by the way. Like what they did with Iraq was actually like evil, but like planned. Like they, we all know the story. They planted like this story in the New York, I think it was the New York Times, and then they quoted their own sources, and it was all bullshit around the weapons of mass destruction. Trump is actively disagreeing with his own intelligence community on this. But also the intelligence community is fractured because they're all like in the MAGA verse, and they all, like half of them are neocons, half of them are MAGA, some of them are just traditional like national security people, and nobody, even as I was sitting down to record this, Hegseth is deferring on this because he doesn't want to own it because he's not really the secretary, he's not really running the Pentagon. He's a MAGA influencer cosplaying. So like we don't have serious people at the table for what is an absolutely serious issue. And the weirdest thing about this, Jason, is the internal politics of the Republican Party here. So the New York Magazine had a great article about the divisions within MAGA, talked about Marjorie Taylor Greene representing like the other wing. So if Ted Cruz and Tom Cotton and Lindsey Graham are one wing, we've got the Marjorie Taylor Greene, Tucker Carlson wing. And this is what Marjorie Taylor Greene said. Anyone slobbering for the U.S. to become fully involved in the Israel-Iran war is not America first. We have spent trillions in the Middle East, and we have dealt with the aftermath of death, blown apart bodies, never-ending suicide, and disabling PTSD, all because they told us propaganda as to why we must sacrifice our own to defend some of our country's borders and some other country's borders. She keeps going. So that is the view there, Jason, and this sets us up for what is the ultimate scorpion versus tarantula moment of all time here. So we're gonna do some extended cuts on this because this is some incredible footage here. And if people don't know about this yet, just hang on to your seats here. This is Tucker Carlson.
Should we take our break first?
Okay, great. Yeah, that's.
Is this we're getting good at this? Like we know what we're doing now.
Okay, we're gonna take a break. When we come back, we've got Tucker Carlson versus Ted Cruz, Alien versus Predator, Iran versus Iraq, the all-time scorpion versus tarantula moment when we get back.
Summer is full of big moments, weddings, vacations, and endless photos. But if you're dealing with hair thinning or shedding, showing up and being present in those moments might feel tough. Nutrafol takes a whole body approach to hair growth, working from the inside out. So the sooner you start, the sooner you'll be feeling confident and focused on what matters most to you. And you may have heard of Nutrafol's hair growth supplements and wondered, do they actually work? It's a fair question. Many hair supplements overpromise and underdeliver, but Nutrafol is different. As the #1 dermatologist recommended hair growth supplement brand, it's trusted by over 1.5 million people and was clinically tested to deliver real results in just 3 to 6 months. Thinning hair is different for men and women, so a one-size-fits-all approach to hair growth doesn't cut it. Nutrafol has multiple formulas for men and women that are tailored to different life stages, such as postpartum or menopause, and lifestyle factors, such as plant-based lifestyle, so you can get just what you need. Plus, users of Nutrafol men reported no impact to sexual performance. Building a hair growth routine is easy. Order online, no prescription needed. Enjoy free shipping, automated deliveries, and up to 20% savings with Nutrafol subscription. Plus, get free naturopathic doctor consults and a Headspace meditation membership. Start your hair growth journey with Nutrafol. For a limited time, Nutrafol is offering listeners $10 off your first month's subscription and free shipping when you go to Nutrafol.com and enter the promo code MAJORITY. Find out why Nutrafol is the best-selling hair growth supplement brand at Nutrafol.com, spelling it Nutrafol.com, code majority. That's Nutrafol.com/majority. That's Nutrafol.com, promo code majority.
When we relaunched this podcast, it seemed like we had to figure it all out on our own. Scripts, setups, filming schedules, logos. It was super overwhelming. And every day it seemed like we had a new decision that needed a new answer. And when you're starting off with something new, it seems like your to-do list keeps growing every day with new tasks, and that list can easily begin to overrun your life. Finding the right tool that not only helps you out, but simplifies everything can be such a game changer. For millions of businesses, that tool is Shopify. Shopify is the commerce platform behind millions of businesses around the world and 10% of all e-commerce in the US, from household names like Mattel and Gymshark to brands just getting started. The Midas Touch Network is proud to have their own store using the Shopify platform. You can get started with your own design studio with hundreds of ready-to-use templates. Shopify helps you build a beautiful online store to match your brand style, accelerate your content creation. Shopify is packed with helpful AI tools that write product descriptions, page headlines, and even enhance your product photography. Now get the word out like you have a marketing team behind you. You could easily create email and social media campaigns whenever your customers are scrolling or strolling. And best yet, Shopify is your commerce expert with world-class expertise in everything from managing inventory to international shipping to processing, returns, and beyond. Turn your business idea into with Shopify on your side. Sign up for your $1 per month trial and start selling today at shopify.com/majority. Go to shopify.com/majority, shopify.com/majority. Well, Senator Ted Cruz appeared on the Tucker Carlson show this week. And boy, was it interesting. These are going to be a little longer than we normally play, but these are just too important not to play in full. Let's go to the first clip.
How many people live in Iran, by the way?
I don't know the population.
At all?
No, I don't know the population.
You don't know the population of the country you seek to topple?
How many people live in Iran?
92 million.
Okay. Yeah.
How could you not know that?
I don't sit around memorizing population tables.
Well, it's kind of relevant because you're calling for the overthrow of the government.
Why is it relevant whether it's 90 million or 80 million or 100 million? Why is that relevant?
Because if you don't know anything about the country...
I didn't say I don't know anything about
Okay, what's the ethnic mix of Iran?
They are Persians and predominantly Shia. Okay,
it's not even... You don't know anything about Iran. So
okay, I am not the Tucker Carlson expert on Iran.
You're a senator who's calling for the overthrow of the government.
You're the one who claims
anything about the country.
No, you don't know anything about the country. You're the one who claims they're not trying to murder Donald Trump. You're the one who can't figure out if it was a good idea to kill General Soleimani, and you said it was bad.
You don't believe they're trying to murder Trump.
Yes, I do.
Because you're not calling for military strikes against them in retaliation. And if you really believe that...
We're carrying out military strikes today.
You said Israel was.
Right, with our help. I said we. Israel is leading them, but we're supporting them.
Well, you're breaking news here, because the U.S. government last night denied, the National Security Council spokesman Alex Pfeiffer denied on behalf of Trump that we were acting on Israel's behalf in any offensive capacity.
No, we're not bombing them. Israel's bombing them.
You just said we were.
We are supporting Israel.
High stakes. You're a senator. If you're saying the United States government is at war with Iran right now, people are listening.
Okay.
So a lot of attention is being paid to the first part of this clip, which I think is cute. How many people live in the country? Yeah. Like, I think that's a little cheap. Like, you know, like I'm not that concerned about whether Ted Cruz knows the population of Iran. The second, although it was a very interesting back and forth, what is notable is that, and forget everything you know about Tucker Carlson for a second and just treat this clip on its own. The point that Carlson is making is an important one, which is, who is we, Jason? That's what we were just talking about. He's asking a very critical question. Who is the we? And that's my big takeaway from this clip, not what the population of Iran is, although I thought that was interesting. It's that Ted Cruz is mixing the we here too, in the same way that Trump is. We need some clarity on this.
Let me add in another layer that makes this that much more confusing when it comes to GOP politics. There's the obvious thing here, right? That Tucker Carlson left Fox News, and so he's not required to toe the line, the neoconservative line that I mean, there's no question in my mind that if Tucker Carlson were still getting a W-2 from Fox News, he would not do any of this. He would not question the idea of war with Iran. He just wouldn't. It wouldn't happen. He is gone, and he's been able to be, quote unquote, more independent as a result of having a platform of his own and not being at Fox. But then you also have to ask, okay, who does Tucker Carlson work for? Who butters his bread now? And we have seen all the stuff he's done with Russian television. We've seen him go to Russia. We've seen him, talk about how great the shopping carts are in Russian grocery stores. And then Google right now, Russia and Iran, and you will see no shortage of headlines that make it clear that Russia is doing everything it can to convince the United States not to support Israel's attacks on Iran because of Russia's long-held sort of foothold that it's had in the Middle East through Iran. Putin has been trying to deal with Iran for a long time in order to, have influence in the Middle East. And I really think that that's what informs a lot of Carlson's thinking. And yet what that means is they're both wrong when you know their intentions.
Well, what's really fascinating, first of all, that's a great point. And if he's at odds with Trump on this, you'd have to imagine that the Justice Department under Biden was collecting a lot of information about this foreign influence, and that the Trump administration wouldn't have been necessarily inclined to do much about it. But if it starts to put Tucker Carlson at odds with Trump administration policy, they might change their tune very quickly. But there's another element of this, Jason.
Hold on. Let's unpack that a little more. Think about it from Russia's perspective. From Russia's perspective, you have great influence over Trump anyway, but you are using that influence right now for the singular thing that you currently want to use that influence for, which is tipping the scales in the negotiations with Ukraine and trying to, if there's going to be any sort of end to the war in Ukraine, you want it to be on your terms, Russia's terms. So as a result, you can't, if you're Putin, publicly go out and criticize Trump right now over Iran or try and influence Trump directly over Iran because you have him where you want him on Ukraine. So what do? You try and create a different sliver, a different landing place in the Republican Party for people who don't like the idea of attacking Iran. And that's where Tucker Carlson plays a role.
Right. And to be clear, we don't know exactly what that relationship is. We just know that there was a widely reported effort from Russia to pay right-wing influencers in this country. And two, Tucker Carlson did all that activity in Russia that we have. And so people can come to their own conclusions. There's another element here, Jason, which is this guy has also had Holocaust deniers on his show, that he is not necessarily he's finding reasons to undermine U.S. support for Israel is in line with another part of his ideology, which, some could say is anti-Semitism adjacent, where he's smuggling views about Israel and the Jews independent of all this that probably are playing a part here.
And if Russia had a particularly strong relationship with the people of Gaza because they were able to, work on things like natural resources and that sort of thing with them. I think we would have heard this kind of skepticism about that war a lot earlier from Tucker Carlson, but they don't.
Right. So there's another clip here that's relevant. So that, we just heard that exchange. There was an equally acrimonious exchange about the question of intelligence gathering.
Does Mossad share all of its intelligence with us?
Oh, probably not, but they share a lot. We don't share all of our intelligence with them, but we share a lot. It's a close alliance.
Do they spy domestically in the United States?
Oh, they probably do, and we do as well. And friends and allies spy on each other. And I assume all of our allies spy on us.
And that's okay with you?
You know what? One of the things about being a conservative is that you're not naive and utopian. You don't think humans are all... Part of the reason socialism doesn't work is the mantra from each according to his abilities to each according to his needs doesn't work. As a conservative, I assume people act in their rational self-interest.
So it's conservative to pay people to spy on you?
It's conservative to recognize that human beings act in their own self-interest, and every one of our friends spies on us. And I'm not...
Do you like it? That's my question. I'm not asking whether they have motive to do it. Of course they do. I understand that. And by the way, I'm not mad at them. But you're an American lawmaker, so I just want to know, hold on, I want to know your attitude. Yeah. You said that your guiding principle, in fact, the only principle, the only criterion.
I said guiding, the overwhelming. I wouldn't say only.
Is it in America's interest? Is it in America's interest for Israel to spy on us, including on the president?
It is in America's interest to be closely allied with Israel because we get huge benefits for it. And you want to see the clearest.
But I just want to stop on the spying for a second. That it takes place, as you know, and including on the president of the United States and several precedents. And I just want to know if that's okay and why is it okay? Wouldn't an American lawmaker say to a client state, you're not allowed to spy on us? I'm sorry. I know why you want to. I'm not mad at you, but you're not allowed to.
Sure.
And I don't care for it. I don't want to be spied on by you. It's kind of weird not to say that, but you don't seem able to say that.
I mean, this, I think, is the best example of like Tucker Carlson went in there with a mission, and it was to frame things in a way that's not good for Israel. But it's also really clear that Ted Cruz thought he was doing an interview with Tucker Carlson and didn't.
Yeah.
Because you see Ted Cruz doing in that conversation things that if he realized he were in an adversarial conversation from the start, he accepted the premises of a lot of questions there. And
awful interview. This is honestly, I would play this in media training. Look, this is an easy question. I worked in diplomacy. I've worked with intelligence people, as you have. What Cruz is saying in a very narrow sense is true, in the sense that we know that our friends are spying on us and we spy on them. But nobody wants to hear that. And two, you still should lead with it's wrong. Like, we want to stop it. Of course. Why isn't that the first thing out of your mouth? He's like, is it wrong? And Cruz is not saying, yes, it's wrong. Like, that's a question. Like, I love the UK. I love France. I love Canada. If somebody asked me, is it okay that the UK, which I'm sure they are spying on us? My answer would be no. And if anybody's in our country spying on us from those diplomatic missions, we should kick them out of this country, and we should do everything possible to stop them from spying on us. And if any of our people, which has happened with some of these countries, including Israel, I think Pollard was his name or whatever, get caught like selling our secrets to them, they should go to prison. Like, period. And that's like, so it's not acceptable, Tucker Carlson. That should have been the answer. Yeah. But it's like, it's weird that he could, like, what interview, you're right. Like, what was he, like, what is he doing? Like, I don't even.
And if you're getting, it was very dumb. And it obviously is from a person who, doesn't have any real experience getting access to anybody who operates in any kind of trade craft, right? As evidenced by the fact that he allows Carlson to use the term spying over and over again. Spying is a very loaded term. Spying is not the same as developing intelligence, making assessments, putting together open source information for the purpose of developing, a strategic advantage in diplomatic relations. These are all ways of saying spying without evoking the image of a person tapping a phone or sneaking around a corner, which is in most cases not what's happening. And to the extent when it is what's happening, which it does probably, but to the extent that it is usually to develop a strategic advantage in keeping them closer to your side, or doing some sort of intelligence gathering in another country, not necessarily for the purposes of deriving an advantage over the country in which you are developing that information. There are plenty of intelligence gatherers that are U.S. agents around the world who are operating in countries you wouldn't expect, not for the purpose of getting an advantage over that country, but to find out what their counterparts from other countries are doing in those places.
And this is another area. It's like Ted Cruz has got to be better prepared for these moments. Like, you go into this situation, what you should be ready to say, although I know this would get him in trouble in Republican circles, is you were just in Russia, Tucker Carlson. Under Marco Rubio's leadership, the Senate Intelligence Committee issued like a gazillion-page report that detailed all of Russia's espionage within this country. There's also potentially credible evidence that they have killed people on U.S. soil. Their people, not ours, that we know of. Does that bother you? Did you bring that up? How come we didn't see the footage of you bringing that up when you were like in the Russian Whole Foods talking about how big their cantaloupes are?
Mm-hmm. It's interesting, right? It's interesting because in the first clip, even though I know his intentions are no good, you got to be. I feel like I'm with Tucker Carlson, right? Because
if you didn't know who Tucker Carlson was in either of these clips, you'd be like, "This is like give the guy the Pulitzer." But then when you realize who he is, you're like, yeah, it's a little more complicated. It's still interesting. It's just the source is bad. So we kind of want to target our enthusiasm for this to be like, okay, this is a great bad Ted Cruz moment, but not necessarily a great Tucker Carlson moment.
Right. And yes, exactly. Because in that second clip, he is carrying water very clearly. He's, from my perspective, carrying water in the first clip. It just is to an end that I agree with, but not for the reasons that I would share. And in the second clip, he just went in there to continue to do what he has sought to do for a long time, which is loosen the jar, soften the American electorate for the idea of completely pulling back from the Middle East, particularly support for Israel's security, which, look, man, is increasingly a hard thing to get behind, other than I absolutely still believe that Israel has a right to exist, while also believing that what Israel has done in Gaza is reprehensible.
Well, you talk about Tucker and his turn. He also went on the Bannon podcast recently and had some words about his former employer.
So what is that? That's not by popular acclaim. That's not like their viewer surveys. Like, we need a lot more Mark Levin. Less Jesse Waters, more Mark Levin. Mark Levin! What they're doing is what they always do, which is just turning up the propaganda hose to full blast and just trying to, knock elderly Fox viewers off their feet and make them submit.
Man, that is a man who has found a new source of income.
Yeah,
that's what that is. And by the way, the audacity to say what they have always done, as if you weren't at times the number one purveyor of propaganda at the place. You were the top dog at doing that. Unbelievable.
Yeah, man.
At least be a whistleblower. You don't get to be a critic, Tucker Carlson. You can't be one. If you're going to be a critic of Fox News, you also have to be a whistleblower. You got to take responsibility and say you were part of it. You can't just stand on the outside and act like, boy, it's really messed up what Fox News has done forever. Boy, isn't it great that we've all been against it for so long? You don't get to do that.
Well, I think that's, we've reached our limit on this gleeful, internal battle between the Republicans here. Where this goes from here, I'm not sure, but it does feel real. And I think people like JD Vance are in a very difficult position who want to stake out their futures within the party, because these are not loosely held beliefs. That much is clear. Now, what's doing the work for what person? How much of it's anti-Semitism? How much of it is a true isolationist view? How much of it is some pro-Russia thing? And obviously, those aren't mutually exclusive. For each person, it's a different mix, right? But it's real. and there are growing important pockets of the Republican coalition that traffic in those ideas. And what makes it hard for listeners is they might come out in a place that you agree with, but you don't agree with how they got there, and how you deal with that is very difficult. Like, you don't want to validate their reasons, but perhaps you take advantage of the outcome if you like the outcome of the policy. Well, let's talk about what happened over the weekend, but start with the most, the saddest news, which is that we had a assassination of some political leaders in Minnesota. And the reaction here, Jason, was just god awful. I don't know if you were on Twitter or X when all this was going on, but it was just absolutely terrible reaction from certain figures on the right.
Yeah, I mean, these clips here. Let's go back one, Jeremy. So it starts with, so Senator Mike Lee. He later it took days to delete these posts, but he had one where he had a picture, like he glorified the shooter and called it Nightmare on Waltz Street. To, I guess, you can't even tell. Is he blaming the governor for this, or is he does he have glee over the fact that this happened? It's neither is okay, and they're both gross. Anyway, and then the next is Elon here, who, if you can go to that one, who said the far left is murderously violent in relation to somebody tweeting about, the CEO of United Healthcare, the Israeli ambassador staffers, and then somebody trying to assassinate the president. They just, their first thought is there's been a political assassination that appears to be perpetrated by somebody on the right. Let's not express any condolences. Let's not express any need for unity. Let's immediately try and do damage control and make the narrative say that actually more political violence is on the left, as if it matters. It's not like arsenic in your water is bad. It doesn't matter whether it was put in the water or in a stream outside your house. It's just bad. It doesn't matter how it got there. And you could just be against it all the time. It's okay to be against it all the time.
What was interesting to me is I've listened to a lot of podcasts of people talking about this, and the assumption is, there were these figures on the right. It was appalling, like the far right, et cetera. But our electeds really, outside of Mike Lee, got it right. And then I was like, I don't think Trump got this one right. And here's a clip of him talking about Governor Waltz of Minnesota.
Have you called the governor yet, or been able to speak to any of them?
I don't really call him. He appointed this guy to a position. I think the governor of Minnesota is so whacked out. I'm not calling him. Why would I call him? I could call him and say, hi, how you doing? The guy doesn't have a clue. He's a mess. So I could be nice and call him, but why waste time?
The governor of Minnesota is whacked out. He says as the killer is at large.
He also, by the way, just said something that's totally not true to my understanding. The idea that the killer had been appointed by Waltz. It just took a complete right-wing Reddit conspiracy thing and elevated it, I think.
I'm not sure about the veracity of that claim or not. I haven't heard anybody. My understanding coming into this, and I haven't looked in that exact clip, is he might have been appointed to some board or something, which he sat on with. He was appointed to a bipartisan board. But this guy. So let's talk about what we know as of today. He was carrying around these No Kings protests flyers. His list included Democratic lawmakers only, from what I understand, and abortion providers. Okay, so if you knew nothing else, the rebuttable presumption, obviously, because if you're willing to kill somebody, you could be so unhinged that it's hard to figure out exactly what your views are. I think this might have been true of the first Trump attempted assassin. But the rebuttable presumption at that point is that this is politically motivated against Democrats, perhaps from a right-wing sort of ideology. Now, that in and of itself is not a mark against right-wing ideology. There are other marks against it, but just because one person believes those things and is motivated to kill doesn't mean that your whole cause is wrong. But it also means that if you're Elon Musk and you're Mike Lee or anybody else suggesting that this was motivated from the far left, that you are lying and you're lying about something quite serious. Now, we know even more now because they've interviewed his roommate, and the roommate was like, this guy voted for Trump. He would be offended that you call him a Democrat. And I think he was fairly fundamentalist Christian. So we're starting to put the pieces together. Again, if this guy had, was an avid Marxist and I found that out tomorrow, would I be totally shocked? No, because the guy is obviously crazy enough to shoot elected officials. So like his ideology might not be super coherent. But what we know as of today, as of this recording, is that the most likely scenario here is that this guy was motivated out of a right-wing ideology to kill Democratic politicians and abortion providers. And I'm not even trying to do too much with that. I'm not even doing the, hey, like right-wing ideology has gone too far. We've done those segments before. Like, look, there were people trying to kill Trump, and there were people trying to kill Scalise, and there were people trying to kill these Democratic lawmakers in Minnesota. Like, they're just because somebody's an attempted assassin or a successful assassin doesn't need to tell us that much more about the ideology. We have other reasons to call out Trump and his people for how they've incited violence. Evidence and evidence A is the way Trump is even handling this very this assassination.
Yeah, I mean, like if you look at Trump's answer there, it is completely devoid of any empathy or humanity. I mean,
right.
You take everything else away from the situation, and one thing you can know is that Donald Trump personally knows a guy, Tim Walz, who personally knew the person who was killed.
Right.
And if you just, I mean, a sane, not sociopathic person would approach this, even as a president, from that point of view. It would be, you remove everything else and you would say, the lawmaker, I believe her name is Melissa Hortman, who was killed, was the top Democrat in the state house there. And Walz is the governor of Minnesota. That means they know each other. That means they're probably pretty close. And any person with any sort of basic empathy or humanity would react accordingly, right? Now, let's go to this idea of like, when there is political violence or mass shootings and that kind of thing, that reptilian partisan part of you, anybody who's listening, who then hopes that it is not your side, let's examine that for a moment, because it's happening on both sides. I hear, like, after the Trump assassination attempt, I had people in my social media mentions. I even had private messages from people that were saying stuff that I found bothersome. And I understood it came from a reptilian place. None of it makes the situation better, depending on, it doesn't matter which side it comes from. Because if you are doing what Musk is doing, and you are trying to make people on your side believe that it's actually the left that perpetrates all the violence, then all you're doing is you're saying to people like the shooter who are inclined toward this kind of violence that the other side is super violent, so you better get violent. And if you do the same thing from the left, you're just making it more and more likely that there will be people on the left who try and perpetrate violence because they think that the right is so much more violent. So yes, I do think that when it's reported, that journalists should be honest and just say, like, call it like it is, balls and strikes. This is a right-wing extremist. But in the long run, the debate, which side is worse, I have an opinion. I think that the right is much more extreme. I don't think it matters. I think that the more violence you have, the more violence you will have. And everybody has to condemn it all the time.
Yeah, and it reminds me of the conversation you and I were having around the United CEO.
Exactly. And we caught a lot of crap from it for it from our listeners.
And honestly, like, listeners, like, I'm sorry. Like, if you're listening to this podcast and you think it's okay to gun down somebody like that United CEO or anybody, right? Even gunning down Trump, anybody, pick a person, just kill anybody. You just listen to the wrong podcast. I'm sorry. Yeah. Like, that's not the world that we don't believe in that world. I don't condone it. I don't even want to minimize it. Like, I just think it's deranged behavior. And
violence begets violence. That's it. That's what it is. Dr. King understood it. I mean, it's not a hard concept.
Right. Nonviolence, in better news, the No Kings protests, I didn't have a chance to attend over the weekend, but they looked awesome. The messaging was great. I love just the name No Kings, the people with American flags. They were not, we were talking about nonviolent. They were nonviolent. The numbers were way, way better than the Trump military parade, which seemed to be a bit of a dud. Thank God. So, that part of the week, we were kind of flanked with a war in the Middle East and the assassinations, but the No Kings versus military parade contrast, I think, was pretty awesome.
I do too. I also, just my perspective, right before we went on the air, Jeremy, our producer, was asking me what I thought about the Trump birthday military parade. And I think what he meant was like, how did it play? Was it as unsuccessful as it appeared to be? And I hadn't even really thought about that. I thought about it purely from the perspective of the soldiers who were required to participate in it. And, it was hot. It was probably humid. I mean, it's the other thing is like, what people don't realize is that after basic training, unless you're in a unit that does a lot of drill and ceremony as part of its role, you don't actually, you'll march here and there occasionally, and you'll do like a change of command ceremony, but like you don't spend a lot of time doing this kind of crap. You have like a job to do. You have work to do. Unless you're like in, the old guard in DC or one of those, particularly if you're like, they had tanks rolling down the street in DC. Like, I promise you, the armor units are not doing parades and drill and ceremony. So this is a huge distraction and irritating, and it's hot. And, look at how many like clips there were of Trump and Melania and Rubio and all of them looking bored and tired and hot. And they were seated the whole time. And if you're in the parade, you're in the parade, man. You have to do the whole, march, as with your thumbs on your seams, as if you're holding rolls of quarters, and you got to do eyes right when you pass by. And it's a pain in the butt. And one thing I noticed was there were quite a few clips that nobody talked about where I saw troops marching in what's referred to as route step. There's two different ways to march, a few different ways to march, but what you always see when you see American troops marching is you see what's referred to as like a quick time step. It's basically what you think of left right, or not a quick time step, sorry, but the terminology has left me. Quick time is when you're getting ready to run, but what you saw them in instead was route step. And route step is basically like just walk. It's like, hey, we got a long way to go and there's nobody watching, and so instead of giving you a left, right, actual route step, which means just walk. You don't have to be in step. And I saw quite a bit of that in the parade, which said to me that there were quite a few platoon sergeants and company first sergeants who were like, this is stupid, and we're not going to march in step this entire time. And I thought that was kind of funny.
Well, in other news, Jason, we got an election coming up in New York City. And how much is this playing around the country? Like, are people, because I've seen some of our candidates on big like shows like Pod Save America, CNN, MSNBC, even the Bulwark. Like, is this hitting the bloodstream outside of the city?
Not much. I think it's the political. I was right with QuickTime. What was I talking about? I was just looking it up. But anyway, the political news that I read has a lot about it. Like I'm aware about this simulation that maybe has Cuomo ahead, in the rank choice and all that. But also I consume political news. Nobody's talking about it here. In fact, I'm going. True has a doubleheader tonight. Little League, like 11U baseball doubleheader, and I can promise you, and there'll be a parent or two who may mention politics to me. Certainly, people will talk about Iran and stuff. I would bet you a couple weeks of paychecks that the race in New York will not come up, and then furthermore, that probably almost nobody there will know that there is a mayoral race in New York. So no, but that's okay.
Yeah, well, let me make the case that this is a fairly big national story. And number one, it's like 10 million people in New York, so that in and of itself is a lot of people. It's like the size of a lot of countries.
Can I? By the way, can I amend what I just said and tell you one part that I think is going to break through over the next couple of days, which is Brad Lander getting arrested, and at the ICE detention facility, and detained, and I think held for now. It might break through in St. Louis. I mean, Brad is originally from there, but also just like a mayoral candidate in New York City getting detained by ICE. that probably is going to break through nationally somewhat.
Yep.
Anyway, go ahead.
Yeah, for sure. And the
is he a mayor? I know he's a counselor.
Oh, he is.
Did he
Yeah.
I thought
He is.
Brad was running. I should know that. Sorry, Brad.
Why does it matter outside of the amount of people who live here? Well, how New York City is governed and how blue cities are governed actually has become a national story for the party.
That's a good point.
And to me, this is a test case of how much we have learned from the last election or the last few elections. And this is an area where I can only imagine there's going to be a significant disagreement amongst the people in our audience. But I didn't want to let this moment go by without at least being clear about where I stand on what is a legitimate debate about where the party should go. And I really think that the question around the candidate Mamdani is a critical question that people who really want to take that like sort of post-election, that sort of spirit and carry it through. This is a moment where we need to stop and say, okay, well, like this is a test, right? Do we endorse this candidate or not? Do we welcome a candidate with his beliefs and background or not? And I've seen him appear on this network, Pod Save America, Bulwark, these networks that we have great relationships with. And so I'm like, okay, he is getting a lot of traction out there with people I love and respect. So I figured I would give a counter to his narrative, right? Which I want to remind people what we're talking about here, which is, again, like I have nothing to say about his character or anything like that. This is strictly a policy disagreement and a question of what kind of background we want of the person who leads.
Can I before you do this say that I don't know anything about this race, and so whatever you say, whatever Ravi's about to say, just aim it all at Ravi, because I don't know enough to take a position here. Go ahead though.
And let me quote, and yes, stipulated Jason doesn't own anything about this. So this is a quote from the Atlantic that I want to start us off, because like you, I'm gonna like start with other people's take on this. Mm-hmm. They said, Mamdani is Cuomo's earnest foil. His resume is thin. He worked as a campaign operative for a few years before winning a state assembly seat in 2020. He is a leftist in the Bernie Sanders mold with a raft of great sounding policies: free buses, free childcare, cheap groceries, frozen rents. But a lot of these are impractical at best. Free buses would deprive the MTA of needed revenue. Free childcare would require a mammoth tax hike that Albany would need to approve, which it has shown no interest of doing. Cheap groceries, Mamdani says, could be provided by the city run stores, which would compete with existing bodegas, deli, supermarkets, and owned by and staffed by New Yorkers. A rent freeze would help people who live in rent-controlled apartments, but inhibit housing construction, making the cost of living crisis worse. So I think that's a good summary of some of the sort of most important positions that Mamdani has and his background, which is, to me, a lack of experience alone is not dispositive, but a lack of experience combined with a series of impractical policies that you can't say how you're going to implement is a problem. And actually, I think that one that goes to the heart of what people have problems with progressives with, which is when I go around the country, and I was in Pennsylvania leading up to the 2018 elections, for instance, what I was hearing from, for instance, Latino small business owners was like, you're the party that's just going to increase my taxes and don't respect me as a taxpayer. And I think if you look at some of these interviews with Mamdani, for instance, when he was at the New York Daily News editorial board meeting, and they're like, you have all these promises. Most of these are going to require you to go to Albany to get permission to borrow more. Do you even know what the cap is of what New York City is allowed to borrow, given you have all these extensive promises? And Mamdani didn't even know what it was. So basically, he's playing the act of somebody who has political courage by saying, I'm going to say you deserve a rent freeze. I'm going to say you deserve free buses and free childcare and government-run grocery stores. But it's not courageous because you're not saying where the money is going to come from. Anybody can get up and say those things. And if you combine that with the fact that he has said some things, and again, like this is where the party just needs to debate whether these are good or bad things. But when you're voting for him, you're voting for somebody who in just the past few years has said queer liberation means defund the police. And we believe in socialist feminism. And who appeared on the Bulwark podcast earlier this week and refused to back away from his comments that we need a globalized intifada, which I know could mean a lot of different things to different people, but certainly doesn't seem like something that if you're concerned about the nuts and bolts, pragmatic governance of New York City, is something that makes me trust you that much more with such an important job, and who doesn't even want mayoral control of the school system, but wants to delegate that to some vague board to oversee the school system instead of within the hands of the office that he has. And then again, has very little to say about how he would improve those schools. I'm like, sorry, I'm not signing up for that. And if you're listening to this podcast and you've heard him on a bunch of other podcasts, seems like a super interesting guy, seems like he's got great vibes, could even be a great guy. But his policies to me are the exact opposite of where we should be heading in our cities. And I mentioned this with a bit of gusto because I told you after the last election that when these moments come, I'm gonna be honest with you. Doesn't mean I'm right. It doesn't mean I like what I say is gospel, but I feel like I owe it to the audience to share my perspective in moments like this when we have these inflection points within the party.
Well, I appreciate you doing it. It's really interesting. It is what I will say, knowing nothing about the race, is that one thing you have always done in this show is talk about New York politics without any sort of regard for what the correct partisan answer is, or any sort of regard for how it plays for you in New York, where you live and are involved in politics. Like you at times were critical of Alvin Bragg as prosecutor after you helped him become prosecutor.
And he and I have been cool since. It's funny. He always returns my texts. I love Alvin. But like, I feel like this is like, why would people listen to this podcast if they felt like I was playing politician, right? Like to me, it's like, I owe it to them to share what I believe. And these are not easy things because I have a lot of friends on that, like involved in that campaign, including the guy who does his video is a really good friend of mine, Matt McLaughlin, who I think is awesome. And like, if those people are listening, I think you're awesome. Like just because we are not on the same side as this doesn't mean like, I don't think that we're going to lock arms and get together to fight for the things that we believe in together. I just think that this is an area where I just have like pretty significantly different views than some very powerful people, both within New York City politics and media. And it's okay. Like part of being a big tent means we have to be able to have these disagreements.
You know what I think is interesting, to go back to sort of your earlier framing, which is more to like the central theme of the show, like to what extent does this play nationally and how does it affect national politics? I think one, absolutely, when large American cities are able to govern effectively, particularly New York City, it is a great argument, or at least it mollifies somewhat one of the biggest arguments that the conservatives have against us, right? Like, I mean, one of the New Yorkers, I always think about the fact they're very proud of their water, and that the water system in New York, like you can drink the tap water. That's a big deal. Like if you went to New York and you couldn't drink the tap water, and a lot of people from all over the country go, visit New York, and if one of the things you got there and it was like going to Puerto Vallarta and you couldn't drink the tap water, that would be a powerful argument, for instance, against democratic governance and progressive governance. I also still believe that the best argument for progressive values is progress people can see. So when you have these blue laboratories, as you've always said, you have to really have a higher expectation for yourself. And then on the other side of this, I think about the fact that we probably sometimes and this doesn't really have anything to do with what you were saying about who should or should not win the election, but just from a prognosticating standpoint, we probably overanalyze the results of New York mayoral elections in order to pull lessons out for national politics. Because I think about like when de Blasio won, people were like, oh, it's a big turn toward the progressive side. And then it turned out like there were plenty of things about his administration that, whether they were because he was progressive or because he was Bill de Blasio, just weren't effective governance. And then Eric Adams won, and a lot of people, including we talked about on this show, the diagnosis was, oh, there's a moderate sort of strain, a moderate, sort of desire from within the party. But then it turned out he did a bunch of stuff that was incompetent and potentially corrupt. And so you don't even know what to draw from that. But anyway, it's just kind of an interesting thought.
Well, what's interesting is if Mamdani wins
all
the primary,
politics are local, basically, is what you get out of it.
For sure. And actually, here's something to watch out for just from a nuts and bolts perspective. If Mamdani wins this, and its ranked choice is very complicated, if he wins this election, this primary, it's not over because you have Adams and Cuomo lurking as third-party candidates. If Cuomo,
but Cuomo's running in it, right? You're just
but I don't fully
If he
understand
loses.
this, but it is taken as a given that he can get on the ballot as an independent in the general.
Okay.
Now, and I think Adams is already there. I forget how he's getting on, but
Hmm.
they all have ways to get on there. Now,
There's also like 1,000 parties there. I don't know if that has part of it.
yeah, but you know,
I don't know anything.
the
about
weird.
it, so I
Here's
should
the
stop
weirdest thing. Eric Adams could win this if Mamdani wins. Eric Adams could win re-election in New York City. Like that is a very strong possibility. And that under that scenario, is it greater than 50%? I don't know. Like, but it's big enough that I find really odd. And I feel for New Yorkers who don't have really good. We don't have good options. We have one guy who's like a criminal in Eric Adams. We have another guy, Cuomo, who's also probably a criminal, and whose personal conduct is inexcusable. And then on the policies, and I, by the way, I probably have more in common policy wise with those two than I do Mamdani. But their personal conduct to me is very troubling. And then Mamdani, who I think has good personal like ethics, but horrendous from my perspective policy, where I'm like, okay, well, how do you balance this? And for people listening, and you're being told. The New York Times basically wrote an editorial saying you have to pick Cuomo or Mamdani for your vote to even matter, which I'm wrestling with that frame because they're probably right, but I don't like being told that in a ranked choice election.
Yeah.
So
Well, what's the point of ranked choice if that's the case?
Right. One thing I could say for sure is Mamdani's not on my ballot. I am, as of today, I don't have Cuomo on my ballot. At best, he would show up dead last, but I'm not inclined to put him on my ballot right now. And to me, it's like a bunch of other people who are like, I've worked with multiple of these people, Zellner, Myrie, and you mentioned Lander, who's not my, like, compared to these other people, has a lot to offer, but like in isolation is not my kind of candidate. But you just have a bunch of these imperfect people. And we're being told we have to pick amongst these two people, even though we have ranked choice.
Yeah, that's wild.
Which in some ways is a mature environment because you could be like, okay, like I care more about policy than personal conduct. So, and I'm saying this as a hypothetical. This is not necessarily where I am yet, but this is what I'm grappling with. I care more about policy than personal conduct. So Cuomo makes my last choice, right? That's what somebody could conceivably say, right? But he can't be first because I don't want to endorse this person's behavior. Or the flip side, which is like, I can't vote for Cuomo because of all of his personal conduct issues. So he's off my ballot. Mamdani, I buy that he like all this stuff that Ravi's saying about like his bad politics. So I don't want to put him near the top of my ballot because I don't want to say I voted for this guy. But in a world where it's him versus Cuomo, I want to reject the personal conduct of Cuomo. So therefore, I'm going to endorse Mamdani, and then maybe we can do this again in the fall, and then I can maybe vote for Adams because his thing is different than Cuomo's thing, and whatever. So it's a complicated scenario outside of just what it means for the party. So I sympathize with people who don't feel like they have a very good series of options right now, and that the whole ranked choice plus general election part of this is really awful. It's a really awful combination. I like ranked choice, but I think the combination of this race is kind of tough for people.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I learned a lot just now. That was fun. Okay. Well, what's new?
Well, I had a dinner. My cousin is getting engaged. I had this dinner on Saturday night with all my family. And my grandma's 89, who,
I saw the pictures on Instagram of her.
She's hilarious. I was like with my grandma and my uncle, my mom, and it was like I was sitting at a table, and like I had this moment. I won't say too much about what's driving all this, but I had this moment where I was like, I always have this anxiety when I'm about to see my family, where you think you get all in your head, and I think this is a particular thing for people who like have unconventional life choices. And for me, it's like, I'm going off to this place and that place. I'm taking on these things. They're always asking me when I'm getting married, I'm kids and stuff. So it's like, every time I'm going to these things, I have it in my head that I'm just going to like piss off my family because I'm so kooky in my life choices. So I'm like, I'm getting into this. And I had like a moment of just extreme anxiety on Friday where I was like, oh, I got to go see my family. And it's going to be this like interrogation, right? So I got it all in my head and I had like a near panic attack. Then I go Saturday and I sit down and we're like talking about all this stuff. What am I doing next year? What am I doing in my life? Yada, yada. And in my head, I thought it was going to be this like dramatic moment. And then my grandma's just like, she's just like, leave him alone. He's living the life I would want to live or something like that. And I was just, and then this kind of my uncle was like, yeah, you're like, whatever. And then he's like backing me up and that was it. We moved on. And I was
That's
like,
awesome.
in my whole head, I was like, this is going to be like this dramatic moment. And then what in reality, what it was just like, I forgot how kooky my family is and that I am the way I am because they are the way they are. And like each one of them was starting to tell their stories. Like my grandma just finished her memoirs, which she said are like this big, and then my uncle, we're talking about going to the Billy Idol concert together. And like, it's like, I'm just like, you know what? Like my family's just as weird as I am. Why do I get anxious about these things? Like, this is just who we are. You know?
It's easy to get stressed about particularly large family gatherings. And then I feel like sometimes after they're over, you're like, oh, I forgot to enjoy that.
Yes. I've had the feeling I honestly was tearing up. It's like, I was tearing up because they were making me laugh so much. I was like, I love being around my family. I don't know why I make myself anxious about it because they're so funny, you know, like they're such characters and each one of them is different. And like my Uncle Ray, who's based on the character of the book, was an 80s metal singer, basically an 80s, like, you know, metal, he wouldn't probably agree with that term, but 80s, like singer, like hair band at various points.
Hair band. Yeah. I was gonna say.
And his guitars became Billy Idol's guitars, which is why we were talking about going.
Wow.
Got me backstage passes. We're going to go. And then my grandma was a dancer, a kind of rockette-like dancer who was a very modern person. Like, you know, my grandpa, you know, was cheating on her and they got divorced. And then like, she basically lived her life, Mary Tyler Moore style at a time when it was very hard. And she was telling me the story about how when my grandfather, who was a police officer, a NYPD police officer, he got, my mom is going to hate this story, but whatever. He got arrested under the Serpico investigations for corruption.
Oh, wow.
Right. This is
you told me this. This is wild. Yeah.
Crazy detail.
Yeah.
And they all confirmed it.
Uh-huh.
When he got arrested, my grandfather, my grandma was still married to him. The New York Post or whatever New York publication put my grandfather on the front page with all the other pictures and listed the children and the wife.
Oh my God.
Like, so my mom's name, my uncle, my grandma's name, because this was a way they used to shame people back in the day. And I was thinking to myself, man, my family, like, that had to, that rarely comes up. Like, I had to really push them to tell me this detail. And they talk about it like matter of fact, to be like, yeah, that was crazy. I was like, what? Like, this would be the only thing I would talk about if this happened to me as a child, but they just kind of moved on from it. Like, there's like, yeah, like grandpa got arrested. Our name was on the front page of the paper. My uncle was saying that he was dating a woman at the time, woke up, they were having breakfast and they saw the headline and she broke up with him at the table because his name was next to my grandfather's picture. And they're just telling this story like it was just like, yeah, this is when the Buffalo Bills lost like to the Chiefs. And I'm like, man, like my family is interesting. I was like, it's just like one of many stories they tell me, you know?
Two things that make me laugh about that. One, ironically, my dad became a cop because of the movie Serpico.
Yeah, we're full circle.
Yeah. But here's the thing about that. For your family, you can say, because this is all on your mom's side, right?
Yeah.
So you can say on your mom's side, you know, you have somebody who was arrested, who of that generation, in that generation was arrested in the Serpico corruption stuff. And then of the same generation on your dad's side, they were involved with Gandhi in hunger strikes and in standing up to the British Empire. That's really interesting that those two things were happening contemporaneously.
Yeah, sorry for going off on this, but it was just a pure moment of joy. And I know a lot of my family listens to this podcast, and sometimes they hate when I share some of these things. But it's honestly, I love my family. Like it you know, anything I write that's of any of any texture about Staten Island comes from this enormous well of just ludicrously interesting details about my family and my neighborhood background, you know, which I just am lucky to have witnessed.
Well, that's awesome.
What's happening in your world? Sorry, I went off on that.
Great. I love that. That was great.
I'm coming in hot at the end of this podcast today.
That's good. So. The biggest, most interesting thing, you know, my stories are always so much more like boring and, you know, dad oriented, right? And so I had an interesting thing happen the other day with True, where I was talking to a friend of mine who's got kids a little bit older. True's going to be 12 in September, and they got kids who are like 16, 17. And it's an interesting, it's the first time I feel like I've ever really seen like character and personality. I mean, True's had a lot of character and personality for years, but where he arrived at a thing that I didn't expect, and it was the first time where I was able to be like, oh, this is becoming a truly autonomous person who has his own character and can arrive, and it's really, it was a very mature thing. And what happened was, True, plays a lot of baseball, and last year his team got second in at the state tournament, and then this year they were playing at like a slightly higher level, which is the highest level. And the other thing that happened this year is like True didn't really grow much, and a lot of the other kids that he's playing against and playing with hit some growth spurts, and so he has struggled a little bit. And so now they were in the state tournament. They did well. They got ninth, playing at like the highest level that 11-year-olds can play at. And I mean, some of the stuff that these 11-year-olds do, you're like, I can't believe that kid is 11. I mean, it's ridiculous. And some of them you look out there like, that's a grown man with a mortgage, right? But it's not. Anyway, but so this was one of the first times that True, and he wasn't the only one, but some of the kids who haven't had quite as successful years playing at this like super high level, where True got a little less playing time this year in the state tournament. And so I was kind of like, my antenna was up for like, how's he going to handle this, And then the tournament ends, and it's like 10 o'clock at night on a Sunday, and we get in the truck, and I can tell he's a little like something's going on in his mind, and I'm ready to like I'm preparing myself to talk him out of feeling like life is unfair or coach was unfair or whatever. And I'm just like, that's what I'm expecting, something like that. Not because True's like that, but that's how a kid would usually react. And True said, I'm like, what's going on? And he's like, I'm really upset. And I was like, why? And he said, I feel like coach works so hard, and I feel like, we got to do better. He's like, and I got to do better. This is the guy who just, had him sit a little bit. He played, but he got less playing time than usual. And he didn't have any sort of sorry for himself reaction. He said, he's like, I just feel terrible for the coach because he works so hard. And then he was like, Dad, when we get home, he's like, I got to hit better. He's like, tryouts are in a month, and I'd really like to stay on this team and not go to like the second level team. He's like, so when we get home, can you park the truck and point the lights at the driveway so you can pitch me heavy balls in the front yard? And I was like, sure. So we did that. And every day since then, he's like, Dad, take me outside and do this. I had a game the other night, and I wasn't able to like practice with True that day. And so Diana told me True made her take like a chuck it, like for the dog, and take baseballs and throw fly balls for him. Like, anyway, it's the first time where I'm like, he had a response that was so mature that I failed to anticipate it. And it's really cool. Like it was a very cool parenting win.
I mean, that's awesome, man. It's, you guys, I think about when your point about like having a distinct personality, it's like you and Diana have such strong personalities, and you're such good parents that like, it is hard probably to like pull yourself out of that as a kid, because they look up to you, so it's like they're gonna obviously model themselves off of you, which is mostly a good thing, but that also creates this sense of like, okay, like at some point inevitably every kid starts to decide that they want to claim something that's theirs, and that's like part of what makes it interesting to watch kids grow up.
Yeah, well, that's the challenge, right? Is like, how do you make sure that there's that they have a very high standard for themselves, but also that they don't feel expectations to do the things that their parents did. It goes back to why we named him True. We named him after "To thine own self be true," so that we could always say to him, hey man, we just want you to follow what you love, and it doesn't have to be the same things we love, But anyway, it was a cool parenting moment to be like, oh, this is becoming a fully formed person with his own character and personality and maturity. And anyway, it was cool. So, all right.
Well, one plug before we go, folks, I haven't plugged this in a while, but go out there and buy Garbage Town. We've still got the hardcover run going on right now. I've noticed there's a big uptick over the past month of people buying the book. I don't know where that's coming from, but I'm excited about it because I haven't been talking about it. But also, I talked about Staten Island. Like, if that is of any interest, I wrote a book all about growing up in the 90s on Staten Island called Garbage Town. So you can buy it wherever you get your books, Amazon, but bookshop.org, etc. And if you buy it over the summer, you'll still be able to buy it in hardcover.
I'll tell you where the uptick's coming from. Having done a couple of books, 2 months after the book comes out, when you get an uptick, that's a bunch of people finished the book and loved it and told other people to get it.
Yeah, that's right. It was a surprising, I was
That's
looking at it, and it's more sales over the past few weeks than even the first week it came out. And I'm like, and I haven't been doing any promotion. So I'm like, that's cool.
That's an indicator of a very good book. And which it is. So that's really cool. Well, okay. As we always do, we'll remind you all that we have the other show on Valor Media Network, which is The Game Within, which is the sort of the intersection of sports and politics that we do with our friend Adisu. And it's really, really good. And it streams live at 2:30 Central on Mondays, drops an audio, usually on Monday evenings. So look for that as well. Subscribe to that. Subscribe to this if you haven't already, wherever you're listening to it now. You can always find me at Jason Kander, wherever you get your socials, and at Ravi M. Gupta, wherever you get your socials. Thanks very much. Leave a 5-star review. Thank you to the Mighty. Remember, we all have a platform. Make sure to use yours today.